Scott Sabin is the Executive Director of Plant with Purpose, formerly Florista USA, which is an international environmental nonprofit organization which works in transforming lives in rural areas where poverty is caused primarily by deforestation. Scott is a person who has long practiced the integration this conference aims to promote. Plant with Purpose provides lasting solutions to rural poverty through community development that integrates reforestation, sustainable agriculture, programs economic opportunity through microfinance and local leadership development. Scott oversees Plant with Purpose projects that are currently at work in 275 communities in 6 countries, including Burundi, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Mexico, Tanzania, and Thailand. And Scott, it's an honor to have you with us. Seated to Scott's right is Bill Deutsch, Research Fellow of Auburn University and founder of Global Water Watch, which is a community-based water quality monitoring program that is hosted by Auburn University International Center for Aquaculture and Aquatic Environments. Bill has taught the principles and practices of community-based water quality monitoring literally all over the world, including an all over that comprises the Philippines, Mexico, Thailand, Ecuador, Guatemala, Rwanda, China, Vietnam, Costa Rica, Panama, Honduras, India, Sweden, Hungary, Slovakia, South America, Peru, Egypt, and Kenya. That must be quite a passport you carry around. Worked in conjunction with a number of government agencies and nonprofit affiliates, which include USAID, USDA, US EPA, USGS, I love those acronyms, and Heifer International. He was named Alabama's Conservationist of the Year in 2011. And Bill, in what little spare time he has, teaches Sabin's Watershed Stewardship course, in which students receive certification from both the US EPA and Global Water Watch in water quality monitoring. And it is a course in which those of you, if there be any here who are students or who would like to become students in this audience, should take. And we're also honored to have Bill with us. Dave Unander is professor of biology at Eastern University, where he teaches tropical ecology, medical botany, and genetics. Dave is also a member of the Sabin teaching faculty, teaching our tropical agriculture and missions course in Costa Rica. He's led numerous courses throughout Latin America. He's introduced students to tropical agriculture and tropical ecology in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Honduras, Peru, Belize, and Costa Rica. Before he taught at Eastern University, Dave served as research associate in ethnobotany at the Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia. He worked there in evaluating antiviral effects of plant species. He also knows the work and ministry of missions and international development through his service as a trustee on the boards of multiple organizations like Educational Concerns for Hunger, ECHO, Plant with Purpose, I hope there's not a conflict of interest here, and Hope Seeds. And Dave, we're honored to have you with us along with Bill and Scott. We're going to begin with Scott and have the speakers speak in that order, so there'll be no more introductions. We'll just let you take the session from here.
Great. And I'm not entirely sure how we got the AV set up here. I did the slides. Yeah.
Okay, Nina will help you with that.
Well, I'm honored to be here and a little in awe. There's an awful lot of people in this room that I've learned a lot from over the years. And I think at one time or another, most of my slide presentation was borrowed from one of these two guys. So I tried to go through ahead of time and take out all of their slides. But, it went both ways. I used some years. But I always consider the fact that I got involved in creation care, in the Christian environmentalism, as sort of an accident of geography, if there are such things as accidents. And I just celebrated 20 years with Plant with Purpose in January. So it's a long-standing accident. But I had spent a summer I was a Navy officer coming out of the Navy. I spent a summer in Guatemala studying Spanish, and God used that time to open my eyes to issues of poverty, to issues of injustice, to people living the gospel in a way that I had never seen or experienced growing up in Southern California. And I came back home to finish my degree and was looking for a place to volunteer, a place to plug in. And Floresta at that time happened to be based in San Diego. So I started out working there. I'll never forget my father's reaction when I was hired. He looked at me and said, "Are you serious? Planting trees for Jesus? That's got to be the most marginal thing I can think of." And to be honest, at the time I wasn't entirely sure he was wrong. I was very interested in issues of poverty. The environmental part didn't make much sense to me. I hadn't yet discovered what the founders of Floresta had learned years earlier. They had begun working as relief volunteers in the Dominican Republic and began to become frustrated with relief and sought deeper answers to why are the people poor, why are they here. And they were working in Santo Domingo, in the shanty towns, and started to follow that problem upstream, both literally and figuratively upstream, and ended up in the rural hillsides where farmers were leaving the land because it was too degraded. And it was interesting, I took my family this summer to the Dominican Republic, and we walked through one of those shanty towns. First time I've been back in the urban setting in many years, and had the same kinds of conversations with people, and without exception, "Why are you here?" "Well, I was a farmer, and there's no opportunities in farming." "Well, why are you here?" "Well, I used to have a couple acres up on this hillside in San Juan de la Maguana, but farming's hard. I'm tired of getting paid only once a year." And without exception, everybody who we talked to in that shanty town had come from the countryside because they could no longer make it. Well, as we went upstream, we began to see that there was a vicious cycle between land degradation and poverty, between deforestation specifically and poverty. That the deforestation caused people to become poorer, more desperate, and in turn they relied ever more heavily on the natural resources. And that really was the fundamental discovery that launched Plant with Purpose 30 years ago. So I'll unpack it a little bit more. But I'm just looking over my shoulder. But you know,
If you want to stay, go ahead.
yeah. How do I do that?
Yeah, you got the clicker.
Yeah. What's that?
Academics do that all the time.
What, look over their shoulders?
No.
Stand up, okay. You know, of course, charcoal and fuel wood, and I've been to communities. We work in the state of Oaxaca, Mexico. One of the reasons we got involved in Oaxaca is because we were looking to, being in San Diego, looking to have a local impact. We're trying to think locally and act globally, kind of the reverse of what you normally hear. We have so many immigrants coming from the state of Oaxaca. We followed the same problem back to the mountains of Oaxaca, and I visited villages where literally their only source of income in their memory was charcoal and firewood. And of course, shifting agriculture or slash and burn agriculture. This particular picture was taken in Chiapas, right on the edge of the rainforest where land had just been cleared. The fact that there's no ownership of the land, or people don't have the rights to use the land, and so they have no vested interest in the long-term sustainability or viability of it. And so small-scale agriculture and firewood are actually the leading cause of deforestation worldwide. We don't tend to think of that. It's much easier to villainize large corporations, and frankly, I enjoy that a lot more too. But the actual fact is that the largest single contributing factor to deforestation is small-scale agriculture and fuel wood. And on the other hand, deforestation contributes to poverty. If you think about a rural farmer, really, there are only two assets. The only things they have to make their way in the world are their soil and whatever rain happens to fall on that. And deforestation robs them of both of those things. The soil erodes away dramatically faster. The springs and rivers dry up, the aquifers dry. You know, a lot of this stuff, being a layman, I've had a hard time understanding the importance of it. But over the last 20 years, again and again and again, I'm reminded that I tend to underestimate it, that these are critical factors. There's connections to health and infectious disease, to malaria, to leishmaniasis. The catastrophic effects we tend to hear about more, the landslides, flooding, and so forth. I have a slide, this is one I stole originally from Dave, but I colored it. But I think that this does a better job of simplifying some of the impacts of deforestation than a lot of the words that I can use. But again, as a layman, the way I've been taught to think of a forest is as a sponge. And it allows the rain to infiltrate the soil, to replenish the aquifers, to be slowly released so that the rivers and streams run year-round. When you take those away, you rob the land of the water resources. So we spend a lot of time talking about clean water. I know Bill's going to be talking about that in a little bit, but we don't too often talk about the health of the watershed that it comes from. Again, tremendous loss of soil, and I think Bill's going to be talking about that as well. But those two things are the primary assets of nearly 1 billion people worldwide. So when you end up with land that looks like this, land that looks like this, you end up with people crowding into the shanty towns of Port-au-Prince or of Nairobi. So, Plant with Purpose, we have realized that if it's a vicious cycle, that there's two factors, or actually probably three, because spiritual depravity also plays a role, 3 factors that reinforce each other. We have to address all of those together. And so we've begun working in environmental restoration, economic empowerment, and spiritual renewal, where all 3 of those come together. Now, I'm terrible when it comes to marketing, and you can see our brochure, and I said so on the back. It says, "Did you know that one of the best ways of fighting poverty is to plant trees?" I hate that statement because it's so much more complex than that, and you can plant a lot of trees without fixing poverty, and all of these things have to be addressed together. So how do we address it? It was your comment about the student who wanted to donate a bulldozer to Haiti, or well, it's been done. That was actually a relatively new bulldozer. It had been sitting there for a couple years when I took that, and I think they turned it into a fairly nice germination bed for a number of plants. But that was exactly what happened. Somebody said, you know, this would be a lot quicker if we just had a tractor. Similarly, I think a lot of people assume that these issues exist because the people are ignorant or stupid. And I've been asked many times, so when you go to Haiti, are you going to teach them how to farm better? Which I get a particular kick out of, because I did work on a farm one summer in college. It was the first job I was ever fired from. Something about a burning tractor, so my track record with tractors isn't very good either. You know, it oftentimes is a lack of knowledge, and I have had illiterate farmers from around the world describe to me how a watershed functions with eloquence that is not matched by teachers in American classrooms. I have heard people explain to me the ecosystem services that are provided by the forest. In Haiti, I've been told there's a proverb that says, either this tree must die or I'll die in its place. People know that they shouldn't cut their trees. They know how to farm, but because of the lack of alternatives and lack of opportunity, desperation trumps education. And that's one of the reasons we felt it was so important to begin to empower people to utilize the opportunities, to discover their own talents, and to get beyond the idea of just giving things to people. Watch my time here. So we have specialized in helping people with improved agriculture. Agroforestry is really where we started 30 years ago, but you can't offer too much in that area without getting involved in other types of sustainable agriculture and community forestry and reforestation, and there's some exciting stuff that we're doing in those areas. I think that Dave is going to probably talk more about that. I'll just throw this slide up. This is a chaga home garden on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro, and just illustrates one of the indigenous systems for maximizing the use of the land on multiple stories. It's an agroforestry system where they're growing coffee and bananas and timber trees and avocados and so forth. And this is a system that we've been able to share in other places as well. But systems of agriculture that mimic some of the ecosystem services that would otherwise be provided by the natural ecosystem. Addressing the economic side, we've integrated a village savings and loan system. I'd love to tell you more about that. This is something we've been working with for the last, since 2006 in Tanzania, and we've implemented it in all our programs in the last 3 years, and it's had a fairly revolutionary effect. I'd love to tell you more about that, but in the interest of time, I won't. And then the third piece is discipleship and partnership, very close partnership with the local churches, helping them to mobilize and reach out to their community as well as develop their own leadership. And I used to describe it, well, it's similar to the vicious cycle. This is what we see is bringing about a virtuous cycle with each one reinforcing the other. And our prayer is with the involvement of the Holy Spirit that can be more than a virtuous cycle, it can be a victorious cycle. As more prosperity brings about opportunities to restore the land, which brings about opportunities to know the Creator better, which brings about, and all three of those things reinforcing one another. I'll come back to that. For years we have contended that watershed restoration should have direct results in people's lives, and this past year we just completed our triennial impact evaluations and measured diarrheal illness, and that was something we had not measured before. And I was actually stunned when we got back the results across the board in the 275 communities we work in, 25% reduction in diarrheal illness over the control communities in here. And I actually didn't believe that, and then we broke the results down a little bit further. It was 50% reduction in diarrheal illness in Haiti and 65% in Tanzania. And that's coming from watershed restoration, from the trees acting as the natural filter that God created, and just feel tremendously blessed to see that. Another thing that we're doing that I'm excited about is using GIS and comparing vegetation change over time to see some of our results on a larger scale. This is Haiti, and the red lines represent the different watersheds we're working in. The little triangles are individual communities that we're working in. So right here is where we've been working the longest in Haiti for about 10 years, 13 years now. And La Vallée and down here towards Benet is some of the newer communities, only a couple years that we've been working there. And so this was what the vegetation cover looked like in 2008. 2011, we're able to subtract the two from each other and see the net change. And very gratifyingly, we see actually a return of forest cover in the two watersheds that we've been involved in the longest. Obviously work to do here, but we've only been involved there for a 20 years. In conclusion, I became a creation care advocate and a Christian environmentalist from probably strictly utilitarian reasons. And somebody asked me once, foundation guy said, "You're not about to tell me that God cares as much about trees as he does about people?" And I said, "No. What I will tell you is the people need the trees." Now, admittedly, that's a utilitarian perspective, and what I've learned since, and I thank several of the people in this room for that, is that God does care about the trees, and God does care immensely about his creation. It has been the blessing and the gift of the last 20 years to learn that and to become reacquainted with that creation. Thank you very much.
Peter's going to help me switch out presentations, and while we're doing that, I'll say it's a great privilege to be here. And I had a chance to facilitate a table topic at lunch and learned a lot from the students. It reinforced my own feelings, and that is we're really being almost overwhelmed with such wonderful new materials, and we kind of all feel like deer in the headlights. I think it's going to take some weeks for us to go home and process. I personally was reminded of so many wonderful things and taught a lot already in this day and a half, and hopefully can contribute a bit with some case studies. You've heard my background a bit, and I'll just go through briefly the point that this year will be my 28th year at Auburn University, and I work in the Department of Fisheries and Allied Aquaculture, which is one of 10 departments in the College of Agriculture. So coming out of my background, which was a graduate of Houghton College with a zoology major, and coming off of my first college level ecology course in 1970, coincided with the first Earth Day. I think we had our first student demonstration at Houghton in 1970. All four of us stormed the administration steps, and we alternately read Genesis 1 with ecological data about degradation of our environment. And, but anyways, I came to Auburn after 11 years of working on large river systems in Pennsylvania, and kind of prided myself on being a tree hugger. And then 28 years at a College of Agriculture mellows you a bit and moderates that. It certainly brings in the human dimension very squarely. And fortunately, our International Center for Aquaculture and Aquatic Environments, which had started on the aquaculture side and was so much focused on providing animal protein for people around the world, there's at least 300 person years of experience of our center colleagues working in scores and scores of countries. But what was happening as I was finishing my doctoral work there was this idea of watersheds, and the idea that some of the agricultural activities had negative impacts. Global Water Watch was born back in those days with the idea that people are the problem and people are the solution. We really looked at a community-based focus. And three big factors are swirling around this world right now, which provide us the impetus for doing this kind of work. One is many of the world's governments are decentralizing, in fact, even falling apart. The Arab Spring might be one part of that, but if you look at Africa or Latin America or Asia, you'll see that there's a devolution of authority and power. There's a mandate at very local levels of government to do natural resource management planning. There is very little skill to do that. There's a crying need for communities to gear up in that and to collect valid data. This coincides, the political reality of democratization of natural resource management, if you will, is coinciding with people's strong desire to be a much stronger voice. They want to be at the table, so to speak. They want civil society to be a viable stakeholder along with market forces and government. And then the third thing is a virtual revolution in low-tech but accurate testing methods to monitor the environment. And when those three lines cross, Water Watch was able to just explode in many ways. We don't hang our shingle very high, and we have many people call us because success breeds success, and they hear these stories and then they want to experience them. And I'll just give you two brief case studies. One is our oldest and most established from the Philippines, and one is just getting started in the last year in Kenya. They're both in the tropical uplands. In fact, both have watersheds with peaks in excess of 9,000 feet. So they can drop precipitously and create these natural and human altered agroecological zones. So there's certain areas that are more appropriate for certain crops, certain trees, and certain livelihoods. The Philippines is in the southern island of Mindanao. It's in central Mindanao. In the upper right there, you can see the community called Langtapan. And Mount Kitanggad is the upper left picture. That's about 2,900 meters, almost 9,000 feet. And that valley you see there is pictured as 4 sub-watersheds in the main stem, the Manapali River. We've worked there about a dozen years, looking at mobilizing communities to address their needs. Now, at our initial meetings, the elders of the communities would come and they would speak in kind of an amorphous sense that when I was a boy, this and this happened, and now it doesn't. I used to drink from this stream, now I wouldn't get near it because we get deathly ill. I used to be able to cross this stream any time of the year, now it's bone dry part of the time and a raging flood other parts of the time. And these sort of, just anecdotal senses of what was happening. We were with indigenous people, the Ta'ande people, as we learned this morning. There was an animistic response to that. A god or gods not being happy, something that they did that deserved it, and so on. So that was our basic setting. But we were able, with the gateway of many trusted non-governmental agencies that have been there for years before we came near the watershed, to partner and to be trusted initially to go in and to introduce this concept that even though you may only have a 4th or 5th grade education, you can really collect valid data. And it took them way beyond their so-called time-space bubbles, because they were thinking of their farm, their village, their family, and we were challenging them to think about a watershed beyond their experience, beyond their daily life. And think of it over a period of years, maybe beyond their lifetime. So it was really an interesting experience to see them respond in that way. But we had a variety of testing methods. You see here some of the water chemistry, some of the bacteriological work, looking at pathogens, and several other means of monitoring. And these good folks started to look at discharge. They just looked at flow of these 4 colored sub-watersheds, and the case just points out 2 here. The blue line is the Maaknao River, the green, smaller sub-watershed there in the center left of the upper diagram. And the red line is the Colasihan River, which is the farthest to the east, the tan-colored watershed. The faint dark line in the background is a rain gauge that was almost halfway in between the two in the Unander River. And these good farmers and teachers and citizens got out there with the ropes and the orange and the stopwatch. In fact, they used mangoes in lieu of oranges and so on. We adapted, and they began to get flow data, discharge, cubic meters per second flow data. And look at, this is just a 5-year, but I say just a 5-year, it's a monthly monitoring for 5 years. And what they found, let's take the red line, the Colasihan, shortly after we did our workshop, it shot to 9 cubic meters a second. There were fatalities. There was a blowout of a major bridge and road. Many livestock were washed away. Farmers lost half their fields and most of their crops. It was a very impactful event. It looks like just a bump on a line here on the graph, but that was reality to them. They then went into an El Nino where it was bone dry for 6 months. There were major crop failures and even people on the verge of starvation. And they looked at this while the Maaknao flowed steady. And relatively stable, providing water for crops, irrigation, and drinking throughout this period. And this was such a revelation to the local government and to these monitors that they were the scientists. They were able to grab this information. It had never been collected, and it was vitally important for the well-being of their future, of their entire municipality. When we layered in a timely fashion over a 12-year period, the E. coli monitoring and soil loss indicators, total suspended solids, with these portable equipment and supplies, we were able to show this diagram. From west to east, you can see these dramatic gradients. Gradients in flow, gradients in E. coli concentrations by the open circle, and gradients in soil loss by the dark circles. And so we had this exercise called Walk Through Time. We took them to the Unander River, the central part of the Monopoly Valley, and we said, let's do a walk through time. Look east. This is where you all are going in 10 years. This is not a centuries-long process. If you want these flood drought cycles, this high level of pathogens and major soil loss, look east, because the way things are being done, this is your trajectory. Look west, this is where you've come from. And many said, this is in our own memory. I remember this. And so that challenged them. They were the data holders. They were empowered to make their own decisions. And as someone has said, the sustainable use of food, energy, water, material, and waste can only occur when people have a part in these decisions and understand their consequences. So yes, we brought in some technology. We were exterior catalysts, but it was in their hands to work. They revised their natural resource management plans. Their work caught the attention of many larger NGOs. It began to propel us into other sites in other countries. They were commissioned by the Senate to testify in Manila, and they were instrumental in affecting the first Clean Water Act of the Philippines. These were people that would show up in shorts and t-shirts, and they had a household income of about $500 a year. But they said, I am the scientist now. I know these things. And I could give you so many stories of how they, as Scott mentioned, they just articulated what was going on that was just so powerful. This brought the attention of FAO. They recognized it as a success story in sustainable development, for what that's worth. And the United Nations, UNESCO, asked for the documentation of that for their book, Forest, Water, People, and the Human Tropics. So that is where we were able to put ourselves on the map a little bit, if you will. And through Heifer International, through Christian Children's Fund, and through these larger governmental agencies, we've been able to work in about 15 countries now. The second case is much shorter. It's brand new, in fact, but many of you know Wangari Maathai and her story. In fact, I heard she spoke at Kelvin maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe some of you were here for that. But that was our table topic. She was a lady who grew up in the Kenyan highlands in the 1950s. She was one of the airlifted 300 Kenyans that was brought to the U.S. by Senator John Kennedy in 1959, just before Peace Corps was launched. And he was, his idea was to educate Kenyans in various fields to go back home and rebuild this country. Bottom line is she went back and started planting trees. She founded the Greenbelt movement in 1977. She was beaten. She was imprisoned many times. She would not give up. She took on President Moy in many facets, and bottom line is they've planted about 70 to 80 million trees. And what they've seen, Scott alluded to, is the unintended positive consequences of renewed watersheds. Spring started to flow that never flowed before. And they started kicking themselves that they weren't documenting this, because that's a very powerful message. So they looked around, and finally we got called, and we were invited to go. So I visited them last November, and I intend to return in March. We've had a very, very positive interaction. And just as an aside, a quick link between the two cases. In the Philippines, the Talanding people believe in water spirits. They believe in 7 spirits that control their world. And we played on that because my favorite aquatic critter happens to be a caddisfly whose scientific name is Hydropsyche, which means water spirit. And so we have been working with them on ecological restoration and cultural restoration, with the caddis being our link. And if you got real good eyes, you'll see it's a part of our logo. In the Aberdare Mountains, when Joe took me there, I said, I wonder if we have any water spirits in this stream. So bottom right, we went into that stream, and this rock here had one laying on it. First bug out of the stream. And I jokingly said to him, carefully put that back because we don't want to offend the water spirits. And he looked at me and he said, you know, the only spirit we have in this place is King Jesus. I stand corrected. but we're just excited about this watershed, the Tana River, and what we'll be doing there with green volunteers that have been planting trees that will now become our water monitors. For the sake of time, I'll just throw out, I won't read it or dwell on it, but you know, I've been thinking about Psalm 107, about the verses about rivers being changed into salt flats, and then right behind it, deserts into pools of water, and how we as Christians give this message of our land use and our views of creation care, strongly influencing how this happens. It's something that's greatly needed in Kenya and perhaps everywhere. But a little pitch to the course. We try to take these principles and let our students from your Christian colleges experience with the identical methodology, but with the case studies, so that even in northern Michigan they can feel like maybe they're there, or they know that I am sampling this in the exact same way. And we use this book that we've condensed our lessons learned, called Community-Based Water Monitoring, as our text there. So this is our sticker with our water spirit, but this has been elaborated in many forms this morning, and I hope we can continue to think about this. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. So he does that. As was mentioned, I teach the Sabin's Tropical Agriculture and Missions course in Costa Rica this May term, and every May term probably. So if you're interested in that, if you'd like some brochures, if you know students or you don't just take them to put them in the refrigerator. Well, I guess you can pray for us. But anyway, you can, if you're interested in, and there's also some on the table underneath the chapter. Well, I've been asked to kind of wrap this up, and the way it's laid out, the outline, I'm going to talk about sustainable agriculture. And it's a little bit like being asked to give an executive summary about the Pacific Ocean. So what I'm going to try to do is provide some grist for the mill of thought, all right? So what is sustainable agriculture, and most important, how do we keep it sustainable? Not just an academic question. So immediately, if you take courses that are very academically oriented on this topic, often a good deal of attention is spent on trying to define what do we mean by sustainable and development, and sustainable development. So in this case, certainly, this would be the first thing biologists tend to think of, is ecological sustainability. You know, is in scriptural terms, that is maintaining the fruitfulness of the land. You know, will the land continue to provide food for those who depend on it? But you cannot separate that in a practical way from economic sustainability. That, in fact, has been one of the great insights of Plant with Purpose. As people have a way of compensating for the opportunity costs of planting trees on their land, they're usually very happy to do so, and then they begin to see benefits from that. But you can't do the ecological sustainability in isolation from economic sustainability. People must be able to support themselves. And all of this is within a greater context of not just individuals and families, but the entire society, the health of the society, and at the deepest level, this is one of the places where it's so important for Christians to be speaking into this. What are the values by which these decisions are made, and what are the policies and laws that are put into place? So, ecological stability, I'm just going to give two examples. I know we just have a short amount of time. As one classic example, biological diversity tends to produce stability, and lack of diversity tends to produce a more unstable situation. Sometimes it's very visible. The Irish potato famine is a classic textbook case. You know, many ecology books point to that. This represents the kind of biological diversity of potatoes that you see in the Andes, even on a single farm. And the odds of all the potatoes falling victim to the same insect or disease there in the Andes is very remote. But the potatoes that at some point crossed the Atlantic and became part of the diet in Ireland were probably just one or a very few varieties. So for a long time, essentially Ireland was planted with one potato that had been propagated by pieces. And when a disease came that one type was susceptible to, in a few weeks they all died. Almost the entire crop was lost. This is a statue in downtown Boston. There are many Irish in Boston, if you didn't know that. And many other, much of the rest of the United States as well. But these are some of the starving Irish who came to Boston. And there's a similar monument in Philadelphia, New York, many cities where lots of Irish came because of the Irish potato famine. They're memorialized. And also, though, with recent decades, the tools that we have, the scientific tools we have today, we're aware of a lot of diversity that was formerly invisible. And there's a paradigm shift occurring in our understanding of soil ecology and how that influences agriculture. And we'll just look at this very briefly. This is broad generalization. Like here they rounded to 1 million billion bacteria. That's definitely rounded. But looking at the different, by an agricultural soil, this researcher meant one that under conventional agriculture with a great deal of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers and so on. This, by healthy soil, it means like a soil under natural conditions. But just looking at this bacteria in a gram of the dry soil, the rhizosphere is the zone of soil immediately adjacent to the roots, where you have an exceptional concentration of microorganisms. And you can see as you go down through here, just comparing a conventional agricultural soil with a more natural one, in all cases there's a leap in the amount of diversity in a natural system. An estimated 25,000 bacterial species per gram of dry soil in the area adjacent to roots. Who counts these things? God does. It's actually 26,000. But anyway, but you get the picture. We don't really, nobody can understand what all is going on in there. This is more complicated than the Amazon. And it's right there in your vegetable garden. So to summarize, this paradigm that's taking hold is grow the soil, and the soil will grow the crop. Farmers need to be most concerned with growing the soil, and the plants will take care of themselves. This is putting a plug for Grace's course. Grace and her husband were serving in a mission capacity for some years, and she trusted me with her course. So anyway, this is Las Mangas, Honduras, where she takes a sustainable tropical agriculture course, where she takes the students. You heard her make some references to that this morning. This is a conventional farm field in that town, or in that area, this valley. This was all formerly rainforest about 20 years ago. This is what the poorest people in Honduras have, if they can afford to buy land at all. If they're not landless, this is the land they can get. And so this farmer was very proud of this land. It was all set. He had cut all the weeds and burned them. And so there was a nice layer of ash, and he was going to plant his corn seeds there, and then the rainy season was going to come. This is a farmer using a system of a legume mulch, a mucuna, known as velvet bean, that's been planted, and then he cut it and it's died, and then he's going to use this dibble stick. He's got his corn seeds in a gourd there. He's going to open a little hole in the mulch and plant the corn seeds. This is equally steep. I'm keeping from falling forward by holding onto his dibble stick, okay? This is not Illinois. And what this has done is very effectively smother the weeds. It also, when the rains come, it soaks gently into this, keeps the soil from washing away, and underneath it's nice and moist. Even though this was at the end of the dry season, it was nice moist soil, and it's building the soil year by year. This is Danny Blank, who was former farm manager at Echo, and he put his hand in. First handful of soil he pulled out had worms and worm egg cases in it. You know, he said, this is like a poster thing. We couldn't, random sampling, just pulls out worms. And so this is, same valley. This was all rainforest about 5 years earlier. Now the corn is just, barely surviving. All right? So, same poor farmers, but different care of the soil. Fire versus mulch. In just a few years, you can change the whole dynamics. Okay, economic sustainability, land kept fruitful, ecological sustainability. Ability of small landowners to support their families is economic sustainability. You have to meet your bottom line. And this is closely linked with societal values and laws, including land ownership rights or not of small landholders. We're going to look at some positive examples. We all hear many negative case examples, but I want to look at some real success stories. But it's all based on a foundation of the ability to own land and have rights to it. There is a value assumption that small farms are good for society and not just an economic inefficiency. Here in the United States, one reason we're seeing more and more both vertical and horizontal integration of many agricultural industries is at many levels in our structures. There is an assumption that the day of the small farm and the small town is past. It's inefficient, and so that is a value. That is, and ideas have consequences. There's an old philosophy text published when I was in college called "Ideas Have Consequences," and it's still true. They do. So farm policies. All right. Going back to the Irish potato famine, the famine was due to much more than just the lack of biological diversity. This man, who was the only dictator England's had, although they had others perhaps called kings, but anyway, he ruled as dictator and conquered Ireland, and much of the land in Ireland, certainly all the good farmland, was given to English nobles, who then had large estates. So by the 1800s, most of those Irish Catholics who soon faced starvation were tenants. They did not own land. They had small plots of ground where they could raise food for their family, which potatoes was the best option. But then they worked growing crops for export on these large estates. So when the famine came, the grain crops continued to be exported from the large landholdings, one of the great ironies. And the British Army was called in to protect warehouses full of grain for export. And they would fire on, there were just these starving masses of people trying to break into warehouses that they knew, because they were the farm workers, they knew they were full of grain, even while they were starving to death. And this is a monument in Ireland to Britain's genocide by starvation, Ireland's Holocaust. So many of the roots of the violence and the bitterness that has plagued Ireland and Northern Ireland to the present day go back to that particular 5-year time period. The shadow on the land has not yet been freed. So, more positive example, as was mentioned, I teach this course in Costa Rica, and I traveled there for other purpose, research and consulting. A long history of small farms, a long history of democratic government, generally a very lawful society. And there's legal support for small landholders. There's many large corporate holdings, but just like in the United States, there's there's an appeal, especially during elections, appeal to the, you know, historic Costa Rican coffee farmer, and, you know, so there's a strong cultural support for the little farmer. And there's long been a legal framework for successful cooperatives. This is actually the El Sabo group last summer visiting Cooperativa Victoria, very successful cooperative. It has more than 3,000 farmers. They focus just on coffee and sugarcane. They, up in the 1930s, they were hit very, very badly by the Depression, just like many farmers were in the United States. And they formed a cooperative in the 1940s, which has been highly successful. These are used sugarcane pressers, if you're wondering what those are. This is one of the coffees they sell, Café Tucán, high-value coffee, organic coffee. It's marketed in the U.S. and European Union. And on the back, it lists the different farmer cooperatives. And all of these together, there's about 8,000 farmers, all of whom have relatively small acreages, that market their coffee through this and get a very fair market price. And here's some of the coffee in one of their warehouses. Very modern. They really ensure good quality. They have a whole QA process and so on. Deeply integrated into their community. They've done a lot to improve the environmental condition of their communities. This was an interesting example. They have a program where all the schools in the area have collection vessels for the kids to bring in their mom's cooking oil. It's collected and then they process it into biodiesel. They run their plant and all their farm vehicles using biodiesel, and they have enough extra left over. They have a biodiesel gas station on the main highway. Okay, and so they're really part of the community. You know, it's pretty neat. Here's another example. This is the Small Producers Association of Talamaca, right on the Panama border. This is where you find the Dole and Chiquita plantations, huge plantations. Almost out of time? Okay, yeah, I'm watching too. These people are mostly Afro-Caribbean and Native Americans, and their focus has been organic and value-added products. Much of the cacao you would buy at Whole Foods all came from this one cooperative. So very successful. It's really helped change the quality of life of the people there. So it can be done, but there's a framework that is kind of assumed. I'll pass on that. Last example, quickly, this is a visit to a vineyard of some Italian cousins, right? My family's part Italian. And they had a very nice house. This was all on about 40 acres. They're able to live a very pleasant middle-class life. Everything's planted on contours. The riparian zones are all protected in these forest zones along the creek. There's a lot of chestnuts and hazelnuts planted. The family collects. There was a Roman ruin here from a vineyard in Roman times. And I asked the cousin, one cousin, those are my sons, one cousin that spoke English, about the grape variety. She named it. I said, is this a new one from the Department of Agriculture? She said, no, it's from here, from this valley. This is the grape variety. It's been grown in this valley since Roman times. And I began to get a vision of a very different kind of relationship with the land. So just very quickly, if you fly into Italy, the farms are all small. The farm homes are in little towns. Farmers go out to the land. It's a gardening culture. People have small farms and big gardens, even in the city. They were very oppressed. They were peasants, often bound to the land, but that's all changed in the 20th century. Enormous change in legal status and economic opportunities. Peasant foods like pecorino cheese that this shepherd is pressing here are now part of international markets. I can go into my grocery store in my area of Philadelphia and pay the high prices for what once was peasant food. And there's a very strong market demand for high quality food. Italians really, even if they don't have a high income, they want fresh food. They frequently go to farmers markets, and the recipes, this is very interesting, they like to eat things that are appropriate with the seasons. They have a yearly cycle of recipes for things grown in their area. It's November, so this is what we eat, and they believe it keeps them healthier. So because of that, farmers are doing well, small farmers, young farmers like this couple. And there's supermarket chains going with it. This one's called Italy, isn't that cute? And so sustainable agriculture, ecological sustainability, economic sustainability, societal stability, and health in a legal framework. Shalom. So, all right, so that's hopefully that's some grist for the discussion we'll be having in these breakout sessions.